valuable hidden treasure I've ever searched for. But the most valuable prize of all is not only real, it's right here in the United States. The lost Spanish fleet of 1715.
The sea off Florida's Atlantic coast looks calm and harmless now, its blue waters hiding a dark secret from long ago. More than 300 years ago, a fleet of Spanish ships loaded with gold and riches sank here during a terrible storm.
So when these items were first found, did people think this was part of the 1715?
That may pinpoint another lost ship from the treasure fleet.
In 1715, the greatest treasure fleet ever to leave the New World disappeared overnight, leaving behind tales of lost gold, shipwrecks, and ghostly legends. Centuries later, a team of explorers returned to those same waters, and what they discovered shocked the world. The storm no one expected. The summer of 1715 began with promise. Havana's harbor was alive with noise and color. Sailors shouting, carpenters hammering, merchants tallying up fortunes soon to be bound for Spain. 11 galleons of the Spanish treasure fleet stood ready to depart, their hulls creaking under the weight of the empire itself. In their holds rested more than 14 million pesos in gold and silver, mined in Mexico and Peru, minted into coins and sealed into chests stamped with the royal seal. There were emeralds from Colombia, porcelain from China, and silk from Manila, all evidence of Spain's sprawling colonial reach. It was, quite literally, the wealth of nations, and the fleet's departure was meant to remind Europe that Spain's empire still shimmered with glory. On July 24, 1715, the ships set sail under Captain General Juan Esteban de Ubila and General Don Antonio de Echeverres y Subiza. Their route was familiar: follow the Florida coastline northward, catch the Gulf Stream, and then push east across the Atlantic. For a few days, everything went smoothly. Gentle winds filled their sails, and the sea sparkled like molten glass. Then, without warning, the weather turned. What began as a faint pressure in the air quickly darkened into something sinister. By July 30th, clouds gathered like bruises over the horizon. Winds shifted, tugging violently at the sails. Soon, lightning cleaved the sky, and the fleet was swallowed by a hurricane of historic fury. Eyewitnesses later described it as if the heavens had fallen. Waves as tall as towers rose from the deep, crashing down on decks with deafening force. Ships vanished in seconds, their lanterns snuffed out by wind and water. Masts splintered, cannons tore loose, and crewmen were swept away before they could scream. By dawn, 11 ships were gone. The sun rose over a coastline littered with the wreckage of empire. Along the beaches near present-day Vero Beach and Fort Pierce, survivors stumbled ashore, bleeding, barefoot, and stunned. Others were less fortunate. The sea washed up bodies for days, tangled in ropes or clutching bits of driftwood. And mingled among the debris were flashes of gold and silver, rolling onto the sand with each new wave. News of the catastrophe reached Havana within days, and Spain's court weeks later. The loss was catastrophic. Not only had hundreds of sailors perished, but the king's treasure, years of colonial tribute, had been devoured by the Atlantic. The Spanish crown launched immediate salvage operations, sending divers and slaves equipped with primitive breathing tubes to recover what they could. They worked for years, guided by the last surviving ship's logs and the reports of indigenous witnesses. Hundreds of chests were recovered, yet much of the treasure remained elusive, buried beneath shifting sands and coral reefs. Storm after storm would hide it deeper, scattering the remains of the fleet across miles of seabed. Despite partial recovery, the 1715 disaster crippled Spain's maritime confidence. The empire grew cautious, sending smaller convoys in later years. Insurance markets across Europe reeled. The once invincible Spanish fleet, symbol of global dominance, had been humbled by a single storm. But time has a way of transforming tragedy into legend. Locals along Florida's coast began finding gold coins glinting in the shallows after hurricanes. Sailors whispered of ghost ships that appeared in moonlight, their masts shimmering like silver. And with every retelling, the story of the 1715 treasure fleet grew grander until the coastline itself became known as the Treasure Coast. For over 2 centuries, the ocean guarded its secret. Beneath the waves lay 11 galleons, silent, entombed in sand, their riches sleeping beside the bones of their crews. The exact locations faded from maps, remembered only in rumor and hope, until one day, modern explorers arrived with new tools, new technology, and the same old hunger for gold. The modern treasure hunters. For more than 2 centuries, the wrecks of the 1715 treasure fleet lay hidden beneath the waves, untouched, unmarked, and almost forgotten. The hurricanes that once doomed them continued to sweep the Florida coast, rearranging the seabed, burying and revealing fragments of history with each passing decade. Beachcombers sometimes stumbled upon gold coins after storms, but most assumed those were the last traces of a legend too old to prove. Then, in the 50s, an unassuming contractor named Kip Wagner changed everything. Wagner wasn't an archaeologist or a historian. He was a hobbyist with curiosity and a metal detector. Living near Sebastian, Florida, he often found Spanish coins washed up after hurricanes. They fascinated him, but what struck him most was how consistently they appeared along the same stretch of sand. It was as if the ocean kept spitting up clues, he later said. Wagner began researching old maps, shipping records, and Spanish salvage logs, poring over archives late into the night. His studies led him to a startling conclusion. These coins weren't random. They were part of the long-lost 1715 fleet. In 1953, he teamed up with local friends and fellow enthusiasts, forming the Real 8 Company, named after the Spanish Real de Ocho, the famed piece of 8 coin. Their approach mixed intuition with innovation. They used early versions of magnetometers to detect metal on the seafloor, diving with little more than scuba gear and courage. Their persistence paid off. In 1959, the team located their first major wreck site near Sebastian Inlet. The seafloor glittered with silver coins, gold chains, and ornate jewelry. They had done what generations of dreamers couldn't: rediscovered the treasure fleet. News spread like wildfire. Headlines dubbed Florida's coastline the Treasure Coast, and treasure hunters from around the world descended upon its beaches with shovels, detectors, and dreams of gold. But with fortune came controversy. The state of Florida quickly stepped in, asserting ownership of historical artifacts found in its waters. Legal battles erupted between the Real 8 Company and state officials over who had the right to claim the finds. Wagner argued that without private explorers, the wrecks would have remained lost forever. The state countered that history was not for sale. A compromise eventually formed. Private salvors could operate under state permits, sharing a percentage of their finds. It was the beginning of a delicate partnership, part science, part business, part adventure. The Real 8 Company went on to recover hundreds of thousands of artifacts: gold coins, silver bars, porcelain shards, and even jeweled pendants shaped like crosses. Many are now displayed in Florida's museums, particularly the McClarty Treasure Museum, built near the very beaches where the fleet bowed its fate. As technology advanced, new explorers followed. Mel Fisher, already famous for finding the Nuestra Señora de Atocha in the Florida Keys, expanded the spirit of modern treasure hunting into a full-blown industry. Specialized salvage vessels, underwater metal detectors, and side-scan sonar replaced guesswork with precision. Yet even with all this progress, the ocean remained stubborn. Storms shifted sands, visibility vanished in seconds, and divers still faced the same dangers as their 18th-century predecessors: unpredictable currents and razor-sharp coral. Still, the allure never faded. In 2015, exactly 300 years after the disaster, divers from Queen's Jewels, LLC, the modern company licensed to explore the fleet's remains, struck gold, literally.
To date, only a handful of artifacts have been recovered from the site. Seafarer Exploration, a team of professional explorers specializing in underwater conservation and recovery.
They uncovered over $4.5 million worth of gold coins, including rare royal escudos minted for King Philip V himself. The discovery made global headlines. The divers, who included members of the Schmidt family, called it the find of a lifetime. But beneath the excitement was something deeper: reverence. Each recovered coin, each relic, was not just treasure. It was a tangible link to lives lost long ago. Historians worked alongside salvors to catalog artifacts, piecing together the roots, cargo, and human stories of the ill-fated voyage. What began as a hunt for fortune slowly evolved into a mission of remembrance. Even today, the Treasure Coast continues to yield small discoveries after storms: coins glittering in wet sand, fragments of porcelain, a rusted spike from a ship's hull. They're tiny echoes of a larger mystery, proof that the ocean still guards more secrets than it has revealed. And for every explorer who dives into those restless waters, the dream remains the same: to be the one who finds what history forgot. But when one recent team returned to the depths, what they discovered wasn't just another coin or jewel. It was something far more human and far more haunting. Down to the deep. It was early morning when the dive team slipped into the Atlantic, just off the coast of Sebastian Inlet. The sun had barely risen, and the sea was calm, eerily calm, as if aware of the history it hid. Beneath the surface lay a graveyard more than 3 centuries old, a resting place of sailors, silver, and secrets. For months, the team had been planning this descent. Using side-scan sonar and magnetometers, they had identified a promising site roughly 40 feet deep. The instruments had lit up with readings, dense clusters of metal beneath the sand, too deliberate to be natural. Some thought it was another debris field, others something different. With a final check of oxygen tanks and lines, the divers disappeared beneath the waves. The descent was slow and silent. As the sunlight dimmed, the color of the water shifted from turquoise to a deep blue-green haze. Visibility dropped to just a few feet. Bits of seagrass drifted past like ghosts. Then, through the murk, shapes began to form. Jagged ribs of wood, the outline of a cannon, and scattered coins embedded in coral. They had found it.
The GPS technology helps them track the areas they excavate underwater, but it took long days, hard work, and determination to make their discovery.
The wreckage was remarkably preserved. Centuries of sediment had built a protective cocoon around the ship's remains. Cannons rested where they had fallen, still aimed toward a horizon long since vanished. The divers moved carefully, brushing away sand to reveal intricate carvings on brass fittings and fragments of porcelain still painted with blue glaze. Then, one diver spotted something unusual, a coral-encrusted object half buried under debris. It wasn't metallic. It looked like a chest, its corners rounded and sealed shut by time itself. The team marked the spot, then used gentle airlifts to clear the area. Slowly, the chest emerged, its hinges rusted but intact. Back on the surface, tension buzzed as they hoisted it aboard. The artifact was too fragile to force open underwater. It would have to be examined in a controlled lab. Still, everyone aboard could feel it. Something about this find was different. Days later, under careful conservation, the chest was opened. Inside were not coins or gems, but personal effects. A rosary, a pocket-sized mirror, a pair of spectacles, and a sealed packet of parchment. The paper, remarkably, had survived within a brass tube that had kept out moisture. Experts later determined the writing was in early 18th century Castilian Spanish, likely correspondence from a ship's officer or passenger. When translated, the message was heartbreaking. It was a letter, written just days before the fleet's departure, addressed to a woman in Seville. The author spoke of longing for home, fear of the crossing, and faith that God will still the sea before our return. Those words, frozen in time, written by hands now long gone, transformed the wreck from a treasure site into a tomb of memory. The divers realized they weren't just reclaiming wealth. They were touching history's pulse. News of the discovery spread fast. Scholars and archaeologists from Florida and Spain collaborated to study the find. The letter's ink was stabilized, scanned, and preserved. The artifacts meticulously catalogued. It became one of the rarest forms of treasure imaginable. Human evidence from the lost fleet. In interviews, expedition members described an overwhelming sense of humility. "When you're down there," one diver said, "you stop thinking about gold. You start thinking about the people who never made it home." The sea, once a vault for the empire's riches, had become an archive of its grief. And the deeper they searched, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a shipwreck. It was a story still speaking through salt and silence. Yet, as analysis continued, something about the wreck's contents began to puzzle researchers. Among the Spanish artifacts, they found items that didn't quite fit. Objects whose origins pointed far beyond the empire's usual trade routes. And that's when the story of the 1715 fleet took a strange and unexpected turn. What's in the wreck? At first, the find seemed purely Spanish. Coins bearing the image of King Philip V, silver bars stamped with colonial mint marks, and rosaries carved in the style of Seville. But as the cataloging continued, something began to unsettle the team. Nestled among the familiar relics were items that didn't belong there at all. The first anomaly was a fragment of ceramic, unlike anything from Spain or the New World. Its glaze and pattern suggested East Asian origin, possibly Chinese, though the style didn't match the typical porcelain traded via the Manila galleons. Then came an ornate bronze pendant engraved with a pattern resembling Moorish filigree, its craftsmanship more North African than European. Individually, these might have been dismissed as stray cargo from global trade. But together, they hinted at a deeper story, a web of exchange that wasn't supposed to exist in Spain's strictly controlled mercantile system. Historians have long known that smuggling was rampant within the Spanish Empire. Officially, only Spanish merchants could trade between colonies, all under royal monopoly. Unofficially, contraband flowed freely. British, Dutch, Moorish, and Portuguese traders often bribed officials or partnered with Spanish captains to move goods off the record. The hurricane of 1715 hadn't just swallowed royal treasure, it had swallowed evidence of that secret economy. The presence of those foreign artifacts reignited debates that had simmered for decades among maritime scholars. Were some of the fleet's ships carrying more than gold? Could they have been transporting smuggled luxury goods or even diplomatic gifts from Spain's shadow alliances? The bronze pendant, in particular, drew attention. Laboratory analysis revealed traces of a metal alloy common in Morocco but rare in Iberian manufacture. Its motif, a crescent surrounded by rays, didn't match any known Christian iconography. One theory suggested it may have belonged to a Moorish craftsman employed by the Spanish crown, or perhaps to a secret passenger traveling under an assumed name. As more items were examined, the story of the wreck deepened. Pieces of cloth were found woven in a pattern similar to those of colonial India, and a single carved bead matched 17th century West African trade jewelry. It was as if this one doomed fleet had unknowingly carried the DNA of half the known world. The implications fascinated historians. If confirmed, the findings would reveal that Spain's closed empire was far more porous than official records admit. The ships of 1715 might not just have been carrying gold, they could have been the last silent witnesses to a global network of commerce, faith, and defiance that connected empires through shadow deals and forbidden exchanges. To treasure hunters, it was thrilling. To historians, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, the fleet wasn't just a maritime tragedy. It was a snapshot of globalization before the word existed. For months, universities from Madrid to Miami collaborated to study the artifacts. Some were displayed in temporary exhibits under the name Secrets of the Sunken Empire. Visitors lined up to see a gold cross lying beside a Moroccan pendant and a Chinese porcelain shard, symbols of a world far more interconnected than anyone imagined. And yet, despite the excitement, the discovery raised questions no one could yet answer. Who owned these objects now? The salvors, the state, or the descendants of those who perished? And more haunting still, what else might lie below, sealed in silt and time, that could further challenge the story of the 1715 fleet? As one marine archaeologist put it, the ocean doesn't just hide history, it edits it. Every dive is a chance to read what was erased. The mystery of the foreign artifacts remains unresolved, but it changed how researchers viewed the wreck. It wasn't just a tragedy or a treasure site. It was proof that history, like the sea, is never still. But even as archaeologists raced to preserve what they found, a new challenge loomed: the battle between science, preservation, and profit. Science, preservation, and legacy. Recovering treasure from the ocean is one thing, preserving it is another. The moment artifacts from the 1715 fleet reached the surface, the real battle began. A race against time, salt, and corrosion. Gold might endure, but silver, iron, and bone crumble quickly once exposed to air. What looked pristine underwater could dissolve within days if not properly treated. For the Florida team, this was where science met adventure. Marine archaeologists, chemists, and conservators worked side by side in a makeshift lab near Vero Beach, transforming saltwater relics into preserved history. Each artifact was documented, scanned, and placed in desalination baths to extract centuries of brine. Coins were cleaned grain by grain under microscopes, revealing mint marks unseen since 1715. Even timber fragments, blackened and soft from centuries underwater, were stabilized using polyethylene glycol, the same chemical that saved Viking ships in Scandinavia. But not everyone saw the wreck as a museum piece. For many salvors, the fleet represented fortune, not just history. In Florida's so-called Treasure Coast, private companies have legal salvage rights under state contracts, splitting the profits with the government. This arrangement has long fueled tension between archaeologists who advocate preservation and commercial divers who see themselves as modern explorers continuing a centuries-old hunt. In 2015, that tension reignited when the crew of the Capitana, a salvage vessel licensed to explore part of the 1715 wreck line, announced a stunning discovery: 350 gold coins worth over $4.5 million. Among them were 9 royal presentation coins, the rarest of their kind, minted specifically for the Spanish crown. Found just 100 feet offshore, the haul made global headlines and reignited public fascination with the lost fleet. To historians, however, the find was bittersweet.
You got a ship down there, that's what I think.
Yeah, we do.
These other 1715 wrecks, they found artifacts, but you don't find really much of the ship.
That mud down there really preserves it well. Covers it up and seals it like a time capsule.
While the coins proved that enormous portions of the fleet remained undiscovered, their recovery also underscored how much of the wreck could vanish into private collections before it was properly studied. Every coin that's sold is a page torn from a book, one conservator lamented. And the ocean doesn't give you second editions. Yet cooperation between salvors and scientists slowly began to grow. Some treasure hunters agreed to share GPS data and donate significant pieces to museums, while universities offered to assist with artifact analysis in exchange for access to discoveries. Through fragile compromise, history and profit learned to coexist, uneasily but productively. Today, the legacy of the 1715 fleet extends far beyond the glitter of recovered gold.
A salvage crew has recovered more than 1,000 silver coins from a centuries-old shipwreck. The historic find comes from the remains of the 1715 treasure fleet.
Museums across Florida tell the story not as a tale of loss, but of connection between continents, between centuries, and between those who chase legends and those who study them. The wreck has become a living classroom for marine archaeology, inspiring a new generation to dive not just for riches, but for truth. The explorers who descended into the wreck may have surfaced with treasure, but they also surfaced with perspective. The 1715 fleet, once a symbol of imperial greed, now stands as a reminder of how fragile human ambition can be in the face of nature, and how history, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back to the light. The fleet and the birth of the Treasure Coast. When the storm of 1715 tore through the Spanish treasure fleet, it didn't just scatter gold across the seabed. It sowed the seeds of a new identity for Florida's Atlantic shore. What was once a quiet stretch of coastline became forever marked by the legend of the lost galleons. Over time, that story would transform the region from a string of sleepy beach towns into one of America's most storied coasts, the Treasure Coast. The name itself didn't come until centuries later. In the 50s, long after the sea had swallowed and forgotten the Spanish Empire's might, the first modern salvors began to find gold washing up near Vero Beach and Fort Pierce. Locals started referring to the area as the Treasure Coast, a phrase that quickly caught on in newspapers and tourism brochures. It was romantic, mysterious, and perfectly suited to the sandy stretches where sunbathers might stumble upon a centuries-old coin. That mix of myth and reality still defines the region today. From Sebastian Inlet down through Stewart, nearly every seaside town proudly claims a connection to the 1715 fleet. Murals of galleons and storm clouds decorate public walls. Beach bars serve drinks named Golden Doubloon and Shipwreck Punch. Even the highway signs bear the name Treasure Coast, a reminder that beneath every wave lies history. Local pride runs deep here. The shipwreck isn't just a story, it's a shared inheritance. Families whose ancestors fished these waters tell tales of finding gold coins after hurricanes, when the waves stirred the sand and scattered history onto the shore. Some locals still walk the beaches with metal detectors at dawn, chasing glints of sunlight and luck. In this part of Florida, the dream of treasure never truly faded. It simply became part of the culture. The wreck also shaped the region's tourism and education. Museums like the McClarty Treasure Museum and the Mel Fisher's Treasure Museum attract thousands of visitors each year, displaying glittering coins, gold chains, and the tools of 18th century navigation. But more than the treasure itself, it's the stories that draw people, the courage of sailors, the fury of the storm, and the sheer persistence of those who refused to stop searching. Each discovery fuels that fascination. When divers uncovered millions in gold coins in 2015, local news stations treated it like a hometown victory. Crowds gathered on the beach to cheer the recovery team as if they'd won a championship. Yet, there was also a sense of reverence, an understanding that every find was a conversation with the past, a chance to touch the ghosts of 1715. That reverence extends beyond museums and divers. Schools across the Treasure Coast weave the story of the fleet into local history lessons. Art festivals showcase shipwreck-inspired paintings and jewelry. Annual Fleet Week events commemorate not only the lost ships, but also the men who sailed them, turning tragedy into remembrance. The community doesn't glorify greed, it honors endurance. In many ways, the Treasure Coast's identity mirrors the paradox of the wreck itself, beauty born from disaster. The same storm that ended hundreds of lives also gave rise to centuries of wonder and discovery. For locals, that duality is part of the region's soul, the awareness that fortune and loss often share the same tide. Even modern development hasn't erased that connection. Amid condos and surf shops, the legend of the fleet endures in whispers and place names: Spanish River Road, Doubloon Trail, Silver Sands. Some say the sea still gives up its secrets after strong storms, tossing another relic onto the beach, as if to remind the living that the past is never fully buried. To outsiders, the Treasure Coast might seem like just another beautiful stretch of Florida shoreline, but to those who live there, it's sacred ground, where the boundaries between myth, memory, and history blur like footprints in wet sand. It's a place where sunken gold and human stories rise together with the tide. Ghosts, or just living memories? Every summer, when the winds shift and the Atlantic turns restless, locals along Florida's Treasure Coast say the sea begins to whisper again. Not in words exactly, but in the creak of old boards beneath the surf, the glint of something gold just beyond reach, or the faint shape of a ship's mast shimmering at dusk before sinking back into silence. For some, it's imagination. For others, it's memory. The ghosts of the 1715 fleet reminding the living that they never truly left. The hurricane that destroyed the Spanish treasure fleet claimed more than ships and riches. It took the lives of nearly 1,000 sailors, men whose bodies were never recovered, whose final cries were carried away on the wind. Fishermen say their spirits linger still, wandering the same shoreline where their cargo continues to wash ashore. After major storms, when the sand churns and gold coins appear, locals tell stories of shadowy figures seen walking the beach at night, as if searching for something lost centuries ago. Divers, too, share strange experiences. Many insist they've felt watched while exploring the wreck sites, as though unseen presences drift just beyond their lights. Some report hearing faint music underwater, the ghostly echo of church bells or Spanish hymns, fading in and out with the current. One diver, interviewed for a documentary, described surfacing after a dive to find the sea utterly calm, the air still, and the sound of a voice whispering in Spanish before vanishing into the wind. He never dove there again. Skeptics call these tales coincidence or fatigue, but even they admit there's something uncanny about the 1715 wreck line. The ocean floor there seems to breathe with history. Every artifact recovered, a rosary bead, a sword hilt, a fragment of porcelain, feels almost alive, pulsing with the story of those who once held it. And perhaps that's what people mean by ghosts. Not transparent figures haunting the shore, but the quiet persistence of the past refusing to disappear. The towns along the Treasure Coast embrace these stories with a kind of gentle pride. They're reminders that their history isn't just about gold, it's about people, faith, and the power of memory. Annual Fleet Day ceremonies often end with candlelight vigils by the water, honoring the lost sailors. Locals toss flowers into the waves, watching them drift out to sea, where somewhere beneath, the remains of the ships still rest. Even tourists feel it. Standing on the beach at twilight, with the horizon glowing red and the waves sighing softly, it's easy to imagine the outlines of galleons moving in the mist, ghost ships that rise with the tide just for a moment before vanishing again. The ghosts of the 1715 fleet don't seek to frighten. They remind. They whisper of courage, greed, devotion, and loss. Human stories trapped between time and tide. And maybe that's why, after 3 centuries, Florida's Treasure Coast still feels alive with their presence. The 1715 fleet may have been a disaster for Spain, but for Florida, it became destiny, a legacy that turned loss into legend, and legend into life. Subscribe for more untold stories where history refuses to stay buried beneath the waves.